Welcome to the Passion for Patients podcast. I'm Tonya Winders, your host and the president and CEO of GAAP. We are so excited that you've joined us today, and we have a scientific update on asthma in 2025. And I am so honored to have with me alongside today Rance, Dr. Karen Rance, our Chief Medical Officer at GAAP. And so many of you may have not had the opportunity to meet Karen, but you're going to hear a lot from her in the coming weeks of Passion for Patients podcast, because she's going to do a scientific update on 5 different disease areas. She has done the literature review for us and is going to tell us exactly what we need to know as we go into the latter half of 2025 and into 2026 about what the latest science is when it comes to asthma and other conditions. So for this session, all about asthma. And Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I love to start by asking people, how did you get into this work? What makes you?
Well, thank you. And certainly it's an honor to honestly. My background is as a nurse practitioner, of which I was formerly trained 20 years. And what I found that is just, explaining to the patients wanted, they were thirsty for knowledge. Yes. And what they can do on a practical sense, and relating with them and through a shared decision-making model was very satisfying. And I saw a lot of improvement in outcomes. I did advance my career. I got into executive leadership with pharmaceuticals and biotech industry, and really did that because I felt I could paint the landscape with a broader brush to affect patient care on even a larger stage.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, it's my honor to be here today with GAAP and to talk about the advances for patients.
Great. So let's dive in.
Okay.
What's new in asthma care in 2025?
Well, there's a number of things that are new. I think the first one that would come to mind are the biologics. We do hear a lot about the biologics, certainly their development, the biologics on the markets, the ones that are on the market, different aspects of indications that will even extend beyond asthma. But keeping in mind that those are for the moderate to severe uncontrolled asthma. So I think as far as when I think about your question pertaining to more of a generalized, affecting more, I think the smart inhalers, there are some technology-based inhalers, the wearables, which we can think of whether it's an Apple Watch or something along that line. There's a lot of developing technology to really help patients adhere to their medications. I think another thing that we keep in mind is that from a treatment perspective, what we've really seen abandoned is the monotherapy or the single use of the long-acting bronchodilators. So in years past, we could see that, all the treatment guidelines were backing off from that, but it's definitive now. So we certainly avoid that. And then finally, the smart therapy, which smart is different. So when I was referring to smart earlier, we think of smart technology or smartphones, but smart in this case stands for single maintenance and reliever therapy. So it's an acronym. So what it is it's a really leveraging the data on how patients can improve by using some of the combination inhalers with an inhaled corticosteroid, ICS, and a long-acting bronchodilator for both rescue as well as maintenance. So we see we are in the U.S. right now, but we see the smart therapy really evolving around the globe as far as its adoption.
So I think that when I look at GINA 2025, it's so evident to me. No more albuterol alone, right? Which used to be step one. That's used to be how we diagnose people and got them started on treatment. But now we say, if you're using albuterol as a rescue, you should also be using a controller.
That's right.
same time, right?
That's right.
Always the same,
That's,
using controller and rescue
that's
together rather
right.
than just rescue
Right.
alone. So that's the big shift, I think, in the way we manage, especially steps 1 and 2. And then, as you said, in that step 4, 5 of Gina, it's more around those personalized treatments. So
Right.
tell me a bit more about those personalized treatments and how we're matching personalized treatments in 2025.
Well, I think the strong recognition is that it's no longer one size fits all when it comes to asthma,
Okay.
which that has also been evolving over the last decade. And so the point that you bring up about the necessity and the benefit of using albuterol with an inhaled corticosteroid really stands on the premise that the inflammatory process that's involved with asthma, the recognition of what is going on. So whether it's eosinophilic asthma or maybe it's asthma driven or provoked by house dust mite, those patients we would use perhaps a different approach in. And it's all about having an understanding and a knowledge of what's their provocation, what's the provoking trigger for them. Certainly there are non-allergic type asthma as well. And so I think it's really the understanding, and that's where that patients can work with their doctors
Yeah.
and to go through the different types of evaluation necessary
Right.
and communicate to them, when it gets worse, because then their treatment can be tailored.
Yeah, a lot of times we call that like the treatable traits approach,
That's right.
right? And so matching those traits of maybe it's obesity, maybe it is comorbid other conditions like allergies, as you spoke about, maybe it's environmental things that are triggering their asthma, but understanding those treatable traits and then matching the appropriate treatments
Mhm.
and overall management plan to that is so important in this present day. Now, speaking of triggers, we know that triggers are different from region to region across the world. So, what's kind of the latest thinking about that? Are you hearing, from your work with GAP, are we hearing different things in different places as far as what's really triggering asthma?
Yes, and we are. I think there's more recognition for urban areas, on the effect of just the pollution and some of the other air particles that can be aggravating asthma. We also see, different pollens. In areas of the world where the cooking is done inside the house,
Yes.
we've got the smoke inside the house. So that's a very known trigger, and that is something in that case that it does merit dialogue, because it's not like the family can stop cooking. So
Right.
so those are the type of problems. So the
Yeah.
differences, and certainly I mentioned house dust mite, but there's different type of trees that may
Yes.
trigger some in North America, but then in Australia, it's a different type of tree, etc. So again, that's where understanding what the triggers are is so very, very important to the treatment.
Well, and I think, I mean, again, urban area versus rural area, we see that air quality, indoor air quality, outdoor air quality playing a major role as well. Now, one of the things that often gets a little confusing in this post-COVID era, not that we like to bring up the pandemic, but it
Right.
still does exist, is how do we distinguish between things and symptoms that may be more associated with like viruses or long COVID versus asthma? So help our listeners understand kind of how would you go about that?
Right. Well, and I first want to acknowledge for the patients that it can be confusing for them. So I am a big believer in journaling, right?
Yes.
So if the patients are thinking that they're not quite sure, maybe just start by recording different type of symptoms. So for example, asthma, we know hallmark nighttime cough, wheezing, shortness
Yes.
of breath, those types of things. We don't typically see perhaps brain fog, which is a just a term for sometimes just the I guess minimal confusion that may come
I
along
call it
with it.
fuzzy thinking.
There you go.
Fuzzy
I like
thinking.
that.
Yep.
I like that. Yes. So some of the time, and we see that with COVID, or this long COVID, or, certain viral illnesses, for example, a springtime cold, rhinovirus.
Right.
Typically, I mean, that comes and goes, right? It's a 7-day course. You may or may not have a fever. Typically, one does. And so I think it's all of those type of small different elements in understanding. Asthma is, historically, you can see the patterns and over time, and that's why it goes back to that conversation
Yeah.
starter.
Yeah. So it's important to journal and to understand kind of what your symptoms are, what your triggers may be. But it's also important to realize when maybe your treatment isn't working like it
Right.
should, or you're not being able to do the normal things that you should be able to
Right.
do. I always say if your asthma is well managed, you should have no limitations,
That's right.
zero limitations.
That's right.
You should exercise, you should be able to walk upstairs, you should be
Mhm.
able to go to work or school without
Right.
missing days. All of those things are part of
Mhm.
living with well-controlled asthma. So what do you do if you're just not seeing that effect of your treatment anymore?
So first of all, I want those individuals to acknowledge and know that they can feel better,
Yeah.
right? So what I am saddened probably most about than other aspects in working with patients is when I see self limitations.
Mhm.
And so I really see that the patients need to first understand it doesn't have to be this way.
Yes.
I don't want patients to normalize feeling yucky, having shortness of breath, not being able to walk in the park, or something along that line.
Right.
So that being said, I think it's important you take this conversation um, to your doctor, to your healthcare provider, and have and again, have your journal, have do some self-reflection, because the history when making a diagnosis and changing a treatment plan for a patient, their history is really the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Because we know wheezing can present episodically and they may not be wheezing that moment in time. So what I rely on is the patient communicating, this is happening, and then, really empowering them to make that change.
Yeah. So when you were in the clinic and seeing patients routinely, and even now as people reach out, how often did you recommend or do you recommend that people come back and reassess their asthma with their provider, have those ongoing conversations?
Right.
I mean, the guidelines would say once or twice a year, depending on your severity, but is that enough? And how did you guide patients?
Well, every 6 months was the default, and typically that's because life changes, atmospheres changes, where they work may change. There may be new trees that are planted at school. They may move into a new home.
Yeah.
They are cooking new kinds of foods, etc. So I think just the check-in. Now, I will stress the importance is if your asthma is not controlled, don't wait. Uncontrolled asthma can cause scarring in the lungs. So when we look at the longevity, we look at the health that we want for all of our patients to optimize their lives. We want to minimize, prevent, right? Any type of scar tissue, because scar tissue it's not elastic like lung tissue. So it is, I would say, at a very minimum, every 6 to 12 months. But if you're not controlled, I had some patients that, I saw every 2 months, 3 months, just because there was a changing season. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So let's shift now to a little bit around access and equity, because we know that, again, access to treatments is very different from one region to the next of the world. And oftentimes we see some of the challenges associated with that. What are the things that you hear consistently in engaging with different GAP organizations as far as access barriers?
Yes. So it that is a primary focus of our work here at GAP is really equitable access to meds. So inhaled corticosteroids, which are the cornerstone, certainly in some lower economic income countries are not readily available.
Right.
And so again, that's the cornerstone of our work. And then, we started off this conversation talking about one of the most exciting advances of biologics, and we see this with biologics as well. And I am pleased that, at GAAP, we've recently done a survey and looking at 7 different countries, trying to truly understand how we as an organization can help and what could we recommend from a policy perspective. But I would say, those are two primary areas.
Yeah. And I think we're going to have to save that for an entire,
Yeah.
that data set for an entire different podcast
Right.
forthcoming soon. But as we turn to think about how do people live well with asthma in 2025, I want to spend just these last few minutes. If you had 3 top tips for self-management, what would they be?
Well, I would say first, take your controller medicines,
Yeah.
right? And with that, I would say the importance of make sure you understand how to take it, because just having the medicine, the technique is so important. And that's what makes asthma treatments sometimes more challenging than others.
Yeah.
So it's not a pill one can swallow, it's not an injection one can take, but it's inhaler. So you need to be aware of. And so we have many resources, and we're creating more, that patients can gain access on understanding, how to do their controllers. I would say, that really encompasses adherence too,
Yeah.
right? And so, I would often tell patients if it's a twice a day med, and they're brushing their teeth twice a day, let's put it by your toothbrush.
Yes.
Let's find tricks.
Those habits.
Yes,
that help you.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I personally live in a world of Post-it notes. So,
Yes.
Post-it notes also work,
Yes.
but, and then finally, tracking those symptoms and journaling. We've mentioned
Yes.
that multiple times in our conversation,
Yeah.
but it's so important to be on the journey to being self-empowered as far as optimizing your asthma. You have to be self-aware, right? And it takes a little bit of thought, and the world is busy, our lives are busy, and so jotting that down, because honestly, we won't remember 5 days from now.
Yeah, and not waiting until you get into that appointment to then say, oh, what's happened over the last 6 months?
Right, right, exactly.
So we just have a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Let's look at 2026 and beyond. What do you think is coming as far as treatments? If your crystal ball was working in asthma,
Yeah.
how do you think it'll look differently in the years to come?
Well, I think it's going to be an extension of the current journey that we're on, in as much that we're going to see the continued development of biologics. There's several, in the pipeline.
Yeah.
We will see an expansion of that use. I hope that we also see an expansion of the access, but that's something that we and other organizations will certainly advocate for. I think there will be more apps, more tools.
Yes.
I think, as we see the AI emerging, in all of our lives around the globe, that, how can we use that for good, for adherence? And again, back to that critical component of building self-awareness.
Right.
So I would say those would be the two primaries.
Yeah, I definitely think that we're going to see a lot more treatments in that non-T2 space, right?
That's
And
right.
T2 low space, rather
That's
than
right.
all the emphasis on T2 high
Yeah.
that we've had over the last 5 to 10 years. I think we're also going to see biosimilars in that high T2 space.
That's
So I
right.
think that will help with access.
Yes.
We already have the first biosimilar approved for Xolair. For omalizumab and on the market in specific areas of the world.
Yes.
So I think that that's going to help to broaden the access
Yes.
to those personalized treatments. And I definitely agree that smart technologies have a very important place to role to play in the future of asthma care.
And if I can add one other item, I think along the personalized care is we have seen a great improvement about multiple ethnicities involved in research trials.
Yes.
And so, and this complements what we've been discussing. So to understand, different regions and different ethnicities and their response to asthma symptoms. So I would expect to see a continuation of that, if not even a greater prominence, because I think it's finally being recognized
Yeah.
that it's not just a good thing to do, but to personalize asthma care, it's a necessary thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much
Of
for being here,
course,
Karen, for giving us kind of that encapsulated view of what's happening in 2025,
of
what's
course.
coming. It's super helpful. And to all of you who are listening out there, thank you for tuning in. I hope that you've learned something in our time here with Dr. Rance. And I know that you're going to want to tune in for all of the scientific updates that we have with her across all the different disease areas in the coming weeks of Passion for Patients podcast. So until next time, stay passionate.